She said every bad thing in her life was my fault. Her failed marriage, her empty bank account, even her depression. And for years, I believed her. I used to think the blame game was just something dysfunctional families joked about, something exaggerated, something that happened to other people. But when you grow up inside it, when emotional abuse is dressed up as concern and honesty, you don't see it as abuse at all. You see it as love with conditions. My name doesn't really matter. What matters is that I was the daughter who tried to fix everything. From the outside, our family looked normal, middle class, quiet, no screaming matches in public, no police at the door. People used words like close-knit and strong women when they talked about us. But inside our house, family drama didn't come with raised voices. It came with sighs, silence, long looks that said, "You disappointed me again." My mother was the center of our universe. Charismatic, intelligent, always the victim of someone else's mistakes. Her coworkers were jealous, her friends were ungrateful, her ex-husband, my father, was the reason everything fell apart. And I was convenient. Whenever something went wrong, her eyes found me. If she was late, it was because I distracted her. If she was stressed, it was because I didn't understand her sacrifices. If she felt unhappy, she said it was because she had to worry about me all the time. That's how the blame game started, quietly, almost politely. By the time I was a teenager, apologizing felt like breathing, automatic, necessary. I apologized for my grades, for my mood, for existing too loudly or too quietly. I learned to scan her face the moment she walked into a room, adjusting myself to whatever emotional weather she brought with her. People talk about mental health like it's something you notice when it breaks. For me, it eroded slowly. A little self-trust gone here, a little confidence gone there, until one day I couldn't tell whether my feelings were real or just another inconvenience to someone else. The worst part? She never called it cruelty. She called it honesty. "I'm just telling you the truth," she'd say. "You're too sensitive," she'd add when I cried. "If you were stronger, my life wouldn't be this hard." That sentence lodged itself deep inside me, like a splinter you stop noticing until it infects everything. I tried harder. I became quieter, more responsible. I chose safe dreams. I stayed close to home. I thought if I could just be good enough, the family drama would end, the tension would lift, she would finally be happy. But here's the thing no one tells you about emotional abuse wrapped in love. The better you become, the more they need you to stay broken. And at the time, standing right in the middle of her pain, her accusations, her constant disappointment, I had no idea that the story she was telling about me was about to destroy her own life instead. I just didn't know it yet. At first, I thought it was just stress. My mother's job became harder, her social circle shrank, bills stacked up faster than usual, and with every new problem, the blame game shifted closer to me, more direct, more personal, more impossible to escape. She started narrating her life like a courtroom case, and I was always the defendant. If I hadn't spent so much money raising you, I'd be fine right now. If I didn't have to worry about your future, I could finally focus on myself. You don't understand how much pressure you put on me. She said these things calmly, casually, sometimes even while making dinner. That was the most confusing part of the emotional abuse. There were no explosions, no moments dramatic enough to point at and say, "This is wrong," just a steady drip of guilt that soaked into everything. I began to question my own memories. When she forgot something important, she insisted I never reminded her. When she snapped at me, she claimed I'd provoked her tone. When I tried to explain how her words hurt, she laughed and said I was rewriting history. That's when the gaslighting really took hold. I started keeping things to myself, not because I wanted to hide, but because sharing felt dangerous. Every piece of information could be twisted, used, filed away for later. In our house, family drama didn't erupt, it accumulated, and I carried it all. Friends noticed changes before I did. They said I apologized too much, that I flinched when my phone buzzed, that I asked permission for things most adults didn't think twice about. But when you grow up believing someone else's emotions are your responsibility, you don't call it unhealthy, you call it loyalty. My mental health quietly unraveled. Sleep became shallow, my thoughts raced in circles. I replayed conversations, searching for where I went wrong, what I should have said differently, how I could have prevented her disappointment. I felt guilty for being tired, ashamed for wanting space, terrified of becoming selfish. Meanwhile, her version of events grew more extreme. She started telling relatives that I was difficult, that I was unstable, that she was walking on eggshells around me. Hearing my own flaws described through her voice felt surreal, like watching someone edit your life without your consent. The blame game had gone public. When I confronted her gently, she didn't deny it, she doubled down. If everyone sees it, maybe you should ask yourself why. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but enough for doubt to seep in. What if it wasn't all me? That thought scared me more than the guilt ever had, because if I wasn't the problem, then I had spent years trying to fix something that was never broken, and worse, someone I loved had needed me to believe I was. The tension in the house became unbearable. Conversations felt scripted, every word measured, every reaction monitored. The emotional abuse no longer hid behind concern, it hid behind certainty. She was always right. I was always the reason. And yet, for the first time in my life, I noticed something strange. The more she blamed me for ruining her life, the more her life seemed to be falling apart all on its own. Once the doubt crept in, I couldn't push it back out. I started noticing patterns, small inconsistencies that didn't make sense unless I stopped assuming I was the problem. The blame game only worked as long as I never looked too closely. The moment I did, the story began to fray. My mother loved telling the same stories about how she had given up everything for me, about how her career stalled because she had to clean up my messes, about how her loneliness existed because I was too needy. But when I replayed those memories in my head without her narration, they didn't line up. She had turned down promotions long before I needed help. She had pushed friends away after minor disagreements. Her marriage had cracks years before I was old enough to understand what a marriage even was. Yet somehow every road led back to me. That's the genius of long-term emotional abuse. It doesn't rely on lies alone. It relies on repetition. Say something often enough with enough confidence, and eventually it replaces reality. I began keeping mental notes, not to fight her, but to stay sane. When she said she never raised her voice, I remembered the slammed doors. When she claimed she always supported me, I remembered the dreams she laughed at. When she said she was worried about my mental health, I remembered how she mocked me for needing rest. The shift inside me was quiet but irreversible. She sensed it. Suddenly, her tone changed. She became softer in front of others, more attentive, almost kind. She'd bring me tea without asking, compliment me in public. Then, behind closed doors, the accusations returned, subtler this time, wrapped in concern. "I'm just scared you'll end up alone. I don't know how to help you anymore. I've done everything I can. The family drama evolved, not louder, smarter. She started sharing my struggles with relatives, my anxiety, my hesitation, my need for space, without my consent, always framed as worry, always ending with the same line, "I just don't know what I did wrong as a mother." And suddenly, I wasn't just defending myself to her, I was defending myself to everyone. The pressure mounted. I felt watched, interpreted, diagnosed. My mental health dipped further, not because I was unstable, but because I was trapped in a narrative I didn't write. Then came the moment that changed everything. I overheard her on the phone one night. She didn't know I was home. Her voice was animated, confident, nothing like the exhausted, burdened woman she presented to me. "I've done my part," she said. "She's the one who can't get it together. At some point, you have to accept some people are just broken." Broken. That word landed differently when she said it to someone else, because in that moment, I realized something chilling. She didn't want me to heal. She needed me to stay damaged. The blame game wasn't about accountability, it was about control. As long as I was the problem, she never had to face her own failures, her own choices, her own emptiness. And for the first time, I saw the truth clearly enough to say it, if only to myself. This wasn't love. This was emotional abuse disguised as sacrifice. I didn't confront her, not yet, because once you see the pattern, you don't rush to break it. You wait. The breaking point didn't arrive with a scream. It came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that should have passed without consequence. She asked me to sit down. Her voice was calm, too calm, the way it always was right before the blame game turned cruel. "I need to be honest with you," she said. That sentence used to scare me. I'd brace myself, already searching for my apology before she even spoke. But this time, something in me stayed still. She listed everything wrong in her life again, slower, more deliberate. Her finances, her loneliness, her health, her regrets. Each sentence ended the same way, by circling back to me. "If I hadn't spent years worrying about you, if I didn't have to manage your emotions, if you were stronger, I could finally breathe." I noticed she never mentioned her choices, not once. My chest tightened, not with guilt, but with clarity. I tried to speak, gently, carefully. I said I was doing my best, that I was working, paying my bills, taking care of myself, that maybe, just maybe, not everything was my fault. The room went silent. Her face changed, not angry, not sad, empty. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that sliced through me. "See," she said, "this is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't take responsibility for anything." That was it. Years of emotional abuse crystallized into one unmistakable truth. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't be twisted, no growth that wouldn't threaten her story, no healing that wouldn't expose the lie she'd been living in. I felt my mental health teeter on the edge, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally believed myself, and the cost of that belief was terrifying. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice didn't. "I can't do this anymore," I said. She stared at me, stunned, as if I'd broken an unspoken rule of the family drama, as if I'd stepped off a stage she thought she controlled. "You're running away," she replied quickly, "just like you always do." That familiar accusation hovered in the air, waiting to hook into me. It didn't. I walked out. No dramatic exit, no slammed door, just silence. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and vicious. She called relatives, she cried to friends, she painted herself as abandoned, betrayed, burdened by a daughter who gave up on her. The blame game went into overdrive. Messages poured in, concerned, disappointed, confused. Everyone wanted to know what I had done, No one asked what had been done to me, and for a moment I almost broke, almost apologized, almost went back. But then something unexpected happened. Without me there to absorb it, her life didn't improve, it unraveled. Bills went unpaid, conflicts escalated, people she once leaned on pulled away. The chaos she'd always blamed on me began surfacing everywhere else. That's when I realized I wasn't the cause of her problems. I was the buffer, and now that buffer was gone. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just watched, and I waited. Walking away didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like withdrawal. For years, my sense of purpose had been tied to managing her emotions, smoothing over the family drama, absorbing the fallout of her choices. When I removed myself from that role, there was a hollow space where constant anxiety used to live. And into that space, something dangerous crept in. Peace. I didn't announce boundaries. I didn't make speeches. I didn't confront her with lists of grievances. That would have fed the blame game, given her something to fight against. Instead, I did something far more unsettling to her. I became unavailable. I stopped answering calls immediately. I kept my responses short, neutral, unemotional. No explanations, no apologies, just facts. That shift alone disrupted the pattern of emotional abuse more than any argument ever could. She tried to provoke me. One message accused me of abandoning her during her darkest time. Another hinted that my distance was destroying her mental health. Then came the classics: guilt, fear, obligation, repackaged as concern. I'm worried about you. This isn't healthy. Families don't do this to each other. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the parts of myself that had been quietly dismantled. I slept without dread. I made decisions without rehearsing them. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly faded away from, people who didn't need me to be small to feel whole. And slowly, the family drama shifted. Without my presence to stabilize her, conflicts she used to dump onto me stayed with her. When she complained to others, there was no daughter around to confirm the narrative, no silent nod, no scapegoat. The blame game requires an audience, and I had left the room. Relatives started noticing inconsistencies. Stories changed, details didn't match. The same people who once called me difficult now found themselves on the receiving end of her accusations. She lashed out. I heard about it secondhand: the angry calls, the sudden ultimatums, the dramatic exits from conversations that didn't go her way. And for the first time, I wasn't there to soften the impact. That was the quiet power of it. My mental health began to stabilize, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was being constantly rewritten. Reality stayed put. My feelings made sense again. She, on the other hand, unraveled faster. Without me to blame, she turned inward, or at least tried to, and she didn't like what she found. Regret, loneliness, consequences. Things she'd spent years avoiding by pointing at me. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was revenge fueled by absence. I didn't expose her. I didn't humiliate her. I didn't tell my side loudly or publicly. I simply stopped participating in a system that depended on my pain to function. And systems like that collapse on their own. Karma didn't arrive with an apology. It showed up as silence. Weeks passed, then months, and the calls that once came daily slowed to a trickle, not because she'd found peace, but because she was running out of people to tell her story to. The blame game had finally hit a wall. Without me as the default cause of her suffering, she started aiming elsewhere. At relatives, at old friends, at coworkers who'd once sympathized with her. But here's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. People noticed. They noticed how every conflict somehow made her the victim, how every problem had a villain, how accountability never entered the room. One by one, they pulled back. I heard about the fallout in fragments. A cousin who stopped answering her calls, a longtime friend who told her gently that she needed help, a coworker who filed a complaint after yet another emotional outburst. And for the first time, the family drama wasn't contained within our relationship. It spilled outward, unfiltered, undeniable. And I wasn't there to clean it up. She tried one last tactic. She showed up at my door, unannounced. She looked smaller somehow, older, not fragile, but exposed. The confidence she used to weaponize was gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Fear. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me," she said. There it was, the same sentence, different setting. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend myself against the emotional abuse hidden in that question. I just listened. Then I said something she never expected. "I'm not doing anything to you." She stared at me, confused. "I'm just not doing it for you anymore." That was the moment it clicked. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough to hurt, because the truth was simple and devastating. Her life wasn't falling apart because I left. It was falling apart because I had been holding it together at my expense. The consequences she'd avoided for years had finally caught up with her. Financial strain, strained relationships, a reputation she could no longer control. The very mental health struggles she once used as leverage were now real, and no one else was stepping in to manage them. I closed the door gently, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. In the months that followed, I watched from a distance as she faced the fallout of her own behavior. Therapy, recommended, resisted, then reluctantly attempted. Apologies, vague, conditional, still tangled in the blame game. Attempts to reconnect, carefully negotiated through boundaries I no longer felt guilty for having. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to balance. Not triumph, relief. Karma hadn't punished her. It had simply removed the illusion. After everything settled, I expected to feel victorious. That's how revenge stories usually end. Someone wins, someone loses, the balance restored. But real life doesn't work that way. When the family drama finally quieted, what followed wasn't celebration. It was grief. I grieved the mother I thought I had, the one I kept trying to earn, the version of her that existed only in my hope. Letting go of the blame game meant accepting a painful truth. No amount of love, effort, or sacrifice on my part was ever going to fix her, and that hurt more than the accusations ever did. Healing wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, unremarkable moments. The first time I made a decision without mentally checking how she'd react. The first time I rested without guilt. The first time I noticed my mental health improving, not because life was easier, but because it was finally honest. Therapy helped, not in the way movies portray it with sudden breakthroughs and perfect clarity. It helped by giving language to things I'd never been allowed to name. Control, enmeshment, emotional abuse. Saying those words out loud felt dangerous at first, like I was betraying someone. But slowly they stopped sounding cruel and started sounding accurate, and accuracy, I learned, is not the same as malice. I stopped trying to convince others of my story. People who wanted to understand asked questions. People who didn't matter as much anymore. The blame game loses power when you no longer need to win it. My relationship with my mother became distant but defined. No late-night calls, no emotional dumping, no rescuing. When we spoke, it was surface level, careful and limited. Some might call that cold. I called it survival. There were moments I almost slipped back, moments when guilt knocked wearing her voice, moments when I wondered if setting boundaries made me cruel. But each time I reminded myself, protecting my peace wasn't an attack on her, it was an act of self-respect. What surprised me most was this: without the constant chaos, I didn't become bitter. I became softer with myself. I laughed more. I trusted my instincts. I built a life that didn't revolve around managing someone else's emotions. The family drama didn't disappear, it just stopped being mine to carry. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I felt free. Not free from responsibility, free from blame that was never mine to begin with, free from the role of villain in someone else's story. I didn't need her to admit what she'd done. I didn't need closure wrapped in apologies. I had something better: clarity. And that was enough. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see back then. The blame game wasn't just how she spoke to me, it was how she survived herself. As long as someone else carried the weight of her failures, she never had to feel them, and for a long time, that someone was me. I confused endurance with love. I thought staying meant strength. I believed that if I could just absorb enough pain, the family drama would eventually run out. It never does. What ends it isn't confrontation. It isn't revenge fueled by rage. It's refusal. Refusing to accept responsibility for emotions you didn't create. Refusing to participate in emotional abuse just because it's familiar. Refusing to sacrifice your mental health to keep someone else comfortable. Walking away didn't make me heartless. It made me honest. I still have compassion for her. I can see how fear shaped her, how denial protected her, how blame kept her afloat. But compassion doesn't require self-destruction. Understanding someone's pain doesn't mean volunteering to be its container. That was the hardest lesson. Some people will never forgive you for no longer playing the role they assigned you, and that doesn't make you wrong. It means the relationship depended on imbalance to survive. I used to wonder if things could have been different, if I'd spoken sooner, loved better, tried harder. Now I know that question was part of the trap. The blame game always asks you to look backwards, to rewrite yourself smaller, to believe you missed the one perfect version of yourself that would have made everything okay. There was no such version. There was only me, learning, slowly, that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, the moment you stop defending your right to exist without guilt. My life isn't perfect now. I still have hard days. I still wrestle with old reflexes. But my mental health is my own. My choices are mine. And the silence where constant accusation once lived feels like freedom. If you've ever been blamed for someone else's unhappiness, if you've ever been told you were too sensitive for reacting to cruelty, if you've ever carried family drama that never belonged to you, you're not weak for stepping away. You're not selfish for choosing yourself. And you're not wrong for wanting a life without constant punishment. So I'll leave you with this, not as advice, not as judgment, just a question worth sitting with. What would change in your life if you stopped taking the blame for things you never broke?